Microsoft's purchase of Nokia's handset business marks another leap into the mobile space for the software giant. And for Micky Minhas, it's something of a return to his former days at Qualcomm. These days at Microsoft, he is the Chief Patent Counsel and Patent Strategist. And IPBC's Lloyd asked him what that actually means.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's probably a number of different roles. We were going through quite a transformation at Microsoft in terms of how we were approaching patenting. It's been largely a quantitative model for probably since about 2004 with Marshall Phelps coming to Microsoft from IBM. And that was a very successful model during that era of Microsoft's history and against the types of competitors that Microsoft had typically been against. But as mobile phones started to really take off and into the mid-2000s, the dynamics around the IP marketplace really began to change more from Microsoft's perspective than, say, for incumbents that had been in the mobile phone space. And so what that meant was largely more of a focus on qualitative aspects of the portfolio, more so than just relying on the quantitative aspects of it. I think there was always an underlying belief on large portfolios that there's a lot of good patents underneath there, and that's, I'll call it the IBM model of a lot of volume types of patenting, and people in that industry tended to license that way, and it was rather successful for most of the market participants. What you find in the cellular phone industry is that everybody has really large portfolios, and companies are really not willing to take licensing quite as easy of a path, and often resort to a lot of litigation and worldwide litigation, which means having a lot more focus on the quality of the portfolio, and that's what we've been transforming.
Do you think it will remain a numbers game?
No, I don't. I think it'll actually, I think it's a combination of the two, to be quite honest. But there has to be underlying quality and not just the quantity. And they're not mutually exclusive from one another, but in companies, every company has limited resources, and given the trade-offs and given the amount of time it takes to truly prosecute patents properly and to make sure that the claims are in the best shape that they can be, it takes a lot of time and takes a lot of resources. I do think that means it takes away from some of the quantity. And so I think the bars of what you file on and what you decide to maintain and how rigorous you prosecute has changed, and it's changed on the qualitative bar, which will take its expense from the quantitative side.
We heard first thing this morning from the Chief Executive of Philips, Frans van
Yes.
Houten. Obviously, IP is at the heart of their strategy. You've
Right.
got experience at Microsoft, before that at Qualcomm. Two companies very similarly have IP at the heart of their business.
Yes.
What parallels did you draw from what Frans had to say in terms of the opportunities and challenges that were thrown up there?
Yes, there are aspects of all three companies that are quite similar. I would say Philips and Microsoft are a little bit closer aligned in terms of business strategy than where Qualcomm is. Qualcomm's licensing revenue is about 50%, and its sales, its revenue from chip products, its net revenues from chip products is about 50%. So licensing is a much more inherent part of and a significant part of the overall revenue stream. In companies like Philips and in Microsoft, IP is used in many different ways, as a licensor certainly, and collecting licensing revenue as a direct benefit. But then it's also used in a lot of ways to leverage or further in a business interest. And that's where I think Philips and Microsoft are probably more aligned to one another, where you look at each situation uniquely and you decide what is the best way of using the IP in this situation.
Microsoft's deal with Nokia was official a couple of months ago. Obviously, you've been in the smartphone, in the mobile space for a while, but this is a significant expansion on that. Given what we're seeing, what we have seen in the smartphone litigation, does it fill you with optimism or dread now that you've got the Nokia business on board?
I could probably answer that question two ways. One from the overall Microsoft perspective, and then one as the patent attorney and having to deal with a lot of the legal issues internally. So from the overall perspective, I'm really happy and optimistic about the prospects of having first-party hardware around the world with the footprint that Nokia's had. The market shares, of course, are not where we would like it to be, and that's a lot of the things we'll be working on as a business to help expand. But to have a global brand and a level of mind share and knowledge base around the world of Nokia products is a great starting point for Microsoft to begin from. From the legal side, we purchased the Nokia business, but we did not purchase the Nokia patents with it. So as a patent group, that I feel a little bit behind the 8 ball in terms of needing to make sure that we have all the patents that we need and the agreements in place that we need to help facilitate that business going forward. So there are a number of things I think we need to do internally to improve our situation from an IP perspective in light of the way the acquisition was structured.
I just wanted to pick up on something you said in the session.
Yes.
That you were on the panel of, that you'd seen more deal activity, more deal interest since Lenovo acquired a portfolio of patents from NEC.
Yes.
Is that leading to actual deals getting done? And do you sense that's going to have a knock-on effect on patent valuations, for example, or what do you see the knock-on effects to be?
I think it's a slower process than that. I think when that deal was announced, we saw more activity from companies, particularly companies based in Japan and other parts of Asia, ask internal questions amongst themselves as to, shouldn't we be monetizing our portfolio too? Not unlike when the Nortel deal first occurred in 2011, a lot of boardrooms were certainly a lot more cognizant about how they should be monetizing their portfolio. I think the NEC deal has caused that a second version of that to occur, specifically within Japan. So for that to materialize from the boardroom asking questions until companies are being more active in monetizing does take some time, but we're starting to see some of that activity, particularly out of Japanese companies.
We're seeing a lot of focus in Washington at the moment on patent reform. Obviously,
Yes.
that's been delayed. The Supreme Court is very interested, and a lot of the press around patents has been quite negative.
Yes.
Do patents have a PR problem?
Do patents have a PR problem? I think so. I think to some extent they're a bit misunderstood. I think the connection between why patents help innovation is being lost, and I think it's being often viewed as a tax on products and a tax on the industry versus some of the original intent of how it actually fosters innovation and gives incentives to people to actually invent and share the benefits of those inventions to the general public. I do think there's some work that needs to be done in that space to further educate the public on those benefits.
What can you do as Microsoft?
There's a number of things we can do. I think the education piece has to be down at the grassroots level. It has to be done at the inventor level, and so on. So when you have a broad-based educational issue of that sort, I think there are a number of things that not just Microsoft but other companies will need to do at almost every level to show the public what some of the benefits of that are. I think people have always realized what they are, but there are some reminders of that that are needed. I think it's further exacerbated today by more companies having more indirect business models, and therefore it feels more like a tax. So when companies are selling product at cost or selling product or even giving away product and then making a monetization path indirectly, there are a lot of incentives to minimize that cost and make arguments as to why IP costs are too great. The reality is the monetization path is it's not a straight vertical monetization path, it's an indirect path. And so that's why I think sometimes it's lost.
Do you also see it as a natural evolution for some of those companies that have led the cause for a reform? They themselves will go through an evolution where they actually build up their portfolio and eventually change their opinion on where they...
I think it's going to depend on the company and on the geography and again the monetization path. So if you take an Amazon or a Google that has more of an indirect monetization path, Amazon by selling product and making small margins on lots of volume of product, or Google, who gives search ability for free but makes it up on the advertising side. I think it's unlikely that we'll see much change in their perception of the value of IP, and because it's against their direct business interest. For companies that are more selling product and trying to differentiate their products from others in the marketplace, that I think we'll start to see some changing in behavior for companies like that. So a lot of Chinese companies, as they are becoming more, not just more accepted in terms of products in the marketplace, but as they're more innovating on their own and coming up with more differentiation in their products versus others in the marketplace, I think that's what will cause some of those incentives to change for those companies.